Welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Stay with us. Coming up, every heat wave experienced today is more intense and more likely because of climate change. We'll hear from one of the scientists behind that new finding. The UN Secretary-General declares that the world is in the middle of an ocean emergency and calls for nations to act together to turn the tide. How the area surrounding Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral is being redesigned to mitigate the effects of climate change. And from recyclable strawberry punnets to ditching single-use plastic from your Pims, why this year's Wimbledon is looking to be the greenest championships yet. Welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes happening to our planet, hear from those hit hardest by those changes, and report on the race for solutions. Now, every heatwave we experience is now more intense and more likely to happen because of climate change. That's according to scientists who've reviewed extreme weather hazards and found unequivocal evidence that heatwaves are worsening because of global warming. The research also warns that the number of lives lost and the financial costs of the changes are being underestimated. The report found heat waves are now hotter and occurring far more frequently, with the role of climate change unequivocal. Average and extreme heat levels in every continent are increasing, specifically because of human-caused climate change. Heavy rain events have become more frequent and intense across most parts of the world, mainly due to climate change, with a growing number of floods made more intense by the effects of rising temperatures on rainfall. But the connection with climate change is more nuanced in the case of heat waves. Wildfire risks have already substantially increased in many regions. Recent blazes seen in places including Canada, the United States and Australia have been made much more likely by climate change, causing deaths, air pollution, billions of pounds of damage and, of course, harm to wildlife. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to one of the report's authors, Professor Frederica Otto from the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and Environment at Imperial College London. I began by asking her how they reached their conclusions.
So what we did in this review paper is that we started at last year's IPCC report and then looked at basically a decade of research on all sorts of extreme weather events across the world and the role of climate change in these events, and looked at what are the global conclusions that we can draw. And one of the key conclusions is that every heat wave that is happening today has been made more likely and more intense because of human-induced climate change.
And where are those figures coming from? Tell us a bit more about the data and what you extrapolated.
So we haven't looked at measured data, but we have looked at a large range of published reports and published academic papers that have all used observational data from weather stations, all sorts of other different observational data products, and many different climate models. And all these papers come to the same conclusion when it is concerned heat waves. Not only that climate change does play a role and makes them more likely, more intense, but actually a lot more likely. Climate change is a real game changer when it comes to extreme heat.
And you found when it comes to drought that it's less clear-cut. Why is that?
Basically, the relationship between climate change and drought is much more complex than with heat, because depending on where in the region you are, what makes a drought is quite different. So in regions where, for example, it's already semi-arid, so for example, Eastern Africa, when we have an increase in temperature, but that actually doesn't play a big role for making the droughts worse, because it has already been always so that whenever there was rain, it evaporated quickly. So there would only be a change in drought if climate change would make the rain less. And that is, for example, in Eastern Africa, not or only to a very small degree the case. But in other parts of the world, like Southern Africa or the Mediterranean, that is the case. And so there climate change does increase drought risk.
And you also warn that the financial cost and, sadly, the number of lives being lost due to climate change are being underestimated. Explain just how dangerous that is and also what can be done to rectify that.
Yeah, so first of all, the reason for that is that, as I said, climate change is really a game changer in heat extremes. But in many parts of the world, we actually do not record heat extremes. And so that means we don't record the death associated with this, even though we know from the parts of the world where we do have data that heat waves are the most deadliest extreme events. And we also don't really comprehensively record the economic costs. And that means that when we are thinking about how to adapt to climate change, we might ignore the most obvious and most dangerous changes if we don't record heat impacts and heat extremes.
Dr. Friederike Otto, thank you so much for coming on the show and explaining that research.
Thank you.
Let's get some more of the day's climate news now. G7 leaders say they'll work to establish a climate club by the end of this year. A communiqué issued after today's summit says it will aim to advance ambitious and transparent climate mitigation policies and reduce intense emissions from participating countries. France's President Macron also told the summit in Germany that major world nations must continue with climate and environmental goals despite current pressures on energy markets. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the world is facing an ocean emergency as thousands of activists, scientists and leaders gather at the UN Ocean Conference in the Portuguese capital, Lisbon. They're calling for measures to strengthen protection of the seas.
Sadly, we have taken the ocean for granted. And today we face what I would call an ocean emergency. We must turn the tide. Global heating is pushing ocean temperatures to record levels, creating fiercer and more frequent storms.
Emergency services and charities are working to rescue people in Turkey after flooding left many stranded. Heavy rain in the northwest of the country has caused rivers to overflow and bridges to collapse. The extreme weather comes less than a week after Turkey battled wildfires in the southwest of the country near the popular holiday resort of Marmaris. The famous Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris will be redesigned to help mitigate the effects of climate change. The tourist attraction is being rebuilt following a fire in 2019. New plans involve planting over 30% more vegetation and installing a new cooling system. A 5mm layer of water will stream in front of the cathedral during heat waves, aimed at reducing temperatures by several degrees. Now, Wimbledon is back this week, and for the first time in 3 years, the games, sets and matches are being played in front of capacity crowds. That's great for the sporting atmosphere, though potentially not so good for the environment. But the All England Lawn Tennis Club, which is a signatory to the UN Sport for Climate Action framework, is aiming to make these championships the most sustainable yet. Our sports presenter Jackie Bell-Trout spoke to the club's sustainability manager, Hattie Park, about the changes.
Well, there are a lot of things different at Wimbledon this year, and most noticeably that strawberries and cream are now served in a cardboard box. They still cost £2.50, which is pretty good value, but they come in a beautiful sort of recycled cardboard box. And the person behind that decision is Hattie Park, who's a sustainability chief in charge of sorting all those things out. And Hattie, what was behind all the decisions that you've made for this year?
Well, it was all part of our overall aim to be environment positive, so looking at actions we can take to address climate change, resource depletion, support nature. And we also know that during the championships we have an amazing opportunity to really engage with everyone that comes here, so we want people to be part of it as well. So, you know, the packaging that the strawberries come in is part of that, and thinking about other ways that we can involve everyone, whether they're watching at home or coming to the championships, in being part of this environment positive journey that's so important.
Yeah, well, it's much more obvious this year because, as well as that, you know, you used to get Pimm's in a sort of throwaway plastic cup. Now you've got to buy your plastic cup, and if you want your money back, you've got to bring the cup back, don't you?
Exactly. Well, that's really important to promote a culture of reuse rather than single use and throw away. So that's what we're aiming to do. You know, we hope guests have a brilliant day out. We would like them to return the cups to us. They're taken away, washed, and then come back so they can be used again and again, year after year.
Or you can put them in a box, into the charity box, and then that pound goes to charity, which is a great idea. There's also a beautiful, I haven't seen it yet, but there's meant to be a beautiful wall of flowers or plants.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
There's you know, we present tennis in an English garden. There's an awful lot of gorgeous planting around. On the side of number 1 court, there's a living wall, which is an amazing backdrop for people watching tennis on the hill, but it was deliberately planted with flowering plants to encourage pollinators.
And you also, which I find fascinating, collected all the strings from the rackets, because the players go through a lot of rackets during Wimbledon, the strings break. Collected all of the old strings, cut off the rackets, and did what?
Well, we collected them last year. We've sent them away. They've been ground up, mixed with other waste plastic, and they've come back in the form of countertops on some ticket resolution kiosks, so they're back in the grounds being useful. I think that's the main thing, is that, you know, we wanted to get something useful from those strings, and we'll collect them again this year.
So are you going to go around now and just make sure that everybody is doing what they should be doing with their plastic cups and with their cardboard strawberry boxes?
Yes, I am. I think I'm the bin police. I try to think strategically, and then during the championships, I'm looking in the bins.
Hattie Park, bin police, thank you very much. Have a wonderful championship.
Thank you.
Lots of changes around here, but, you know, changes for the better.
And just before we leave you, we want to know your climate questions. Anything that's ever mystified you or whatever you want to get to the bottom of. It's all for a brand new weekend climate show hosted by the environmental broadcaster and author Tom Heap. It starts this Saturday, the 2nd of July. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can send us the questions that you want to see answered on the show. That is all from us for now. Thanks so much for watching.